The Great Bourgeois. Chapter 1. 90 Years and 32 Teeth. In the Rue Beaucret, Rue de Normandie and the Rue de Saintonge there still exist a few ancient inhabitants who have preserved the memory of a worthy man named M. Gillenormand, and who mention him with complaisance. This good man was old when they were young. This silhouette has not yet entirely disappeared. For those who regard with melancholy that vague swarm of shadows which is called the past, from the labyrinth of streets in the vicinity of the temple to which, under Louis XIV, the names of all the provinces of France were appended exactly as in our day, the streets of the new Tivoli quarter have received the names of all the capitals of Europe. A progression, by the way, in which progress is visible. M. Gillenormand, who was as much alive as possible in 1831, was one of those men who had become curiosities to be viewed, simply because they have lived a long time, and who are strange because they formerly resembled everybody, and now resemble nobody. He was a peculiar old man. And in very truth, a man of another age, the real, complete and rather haughty bourgeois of the 18th century, who wore his good, old bourgeoisie with the air with which marquises wear their marquisates. He was over 90 years of age, his walk was erect, he talked loudly, saw clearly, drank neat, ate, slept, and snored. He had all 32 of his teeth. He only wore spectacles when he read. He was of an amorous disposition, but declared that, for the last 10 years, he had wholly and decidedly renounced women. He could no longer please, he said. He did not add, "I am too old, but I am too poor." He said, "If I were not ruined," all he had left, in fact, was an income of about 15,000 francs. His dream was to come into an inheritance and to have 100,000 livres income for mistresses. He did not belong, as the reader will perceive, to that puny variety of octogenaries who, like M. de Voltaire, have been dying all their life. His was no longevity of a cracked pot. This jovial old man had always had good health. He was superficial, rapid, easily angered. He flew into a passion at everything, generally quite contrary to all reason. When contradicted, he raised his cane. He beat people as he had done in the great century. He had a daughter over 50 years of age, and unmarried, whom he chastised severely with his tongue, when in a rage, and whom he would have liked to whip. She seemed to him to be 8 years old. He boxed his servants' ears soundly, and said, "Ah! Carogny!" One of his oaths was, "By the pantoufloque of the pantouflocade." He had singular freaks of tranquillity. He had himself shaved every day by a barber who had been mad and who detested him, being jealous of M. Gillenormand on account of his wife, a pretty and coquettish barberess. M. Gillenormand admired his own discernment in all things, and declared that he was extremely sagacious. Here is one of his sayings. "I have, in truth, some penetration. I am able to say when a flea bites me, from what woman it came." The words which he uttered the most frequently were, "the sensible man, and nature." He did not give to this last word the grand acceptation which our epoch has accorded to it, but he made it enter, after his own fashion, into his little chimney-corner satires. "Nature," he said, "in order that civilization may have a little of everything, gives it even specimens of its amusing barbarism. Europe possesses specimens of Asia and Africa on a small scale. The cat is a drawing-room tiger, the lizard is a pocket crocodile. The dancers at the opera are pink female savages. They do not eat men, they crunch them. Or, magicians that they are, they transform them into oysters and swallow them. The Caribbeans leave only the bones, they leave only the shell. Such are our morals. We do not devour, we gnaw. We do not exterminate, we claw." Chapter 2. Like master, like house. He lived in the Marais, Rue de Fils du Calvaire, No. 6. He owned the house. This house has since been demolished and rebuilt, and the number has probably been changed in those revolutions of numeration which the streets of Paris undergo. He occupied an ancient and vast apartment on the first floor, between street and gardens, furnished to the very ceilings with great Gobelins and Beauvais tapestries representing pastoral scenes. The subjects of the ceilings and the panels were repeated in miniature on the armchairs. He enveloped his bed in a vast, 9-leaved screen of Coromandel lacquer. Long, full curtains hung from the windows, and formed great, broken folds that were very magnificent. The garden situated immediately under his windows was attached to that one of them which formed the angle. By means of a staircase 12 or 15 steps long, which the old gentleman ascended and descended with great agility. In addition to a library adjoining his chamber, he had a boudoir of which he thought a great deal, a gallant and elegant retreat, with magnificent hangings of straw, with a pattern of flowers and fleurs de lis made on the galleys of Louis XIV. And ordered of his convicts by M. de Vivonne for his mistress. M. Gillenor Mand had inherited it from a grim maternal great-aunt, who had died a centenarian. He had had 2 wives. His manners were something between those of the courtier, which he had never been, and the lawyer, which he might have been. He was gay, and caressing when he had a mind. In his youth he had been one of those men who are always deceived by their wives and never by their mistresses. Because they are, at the same time, the most sullen of husbands and the most charming of lovers in existence. He was a connoisseur of painting. He had in his chamber a marvellous portrait of no one knows whom, painted by Jordaens, executed with great dashes of the brush, with millions of details, in a confused and haphazard manner. M. Gillenormand's attire was not the habit of Louis XIV, nor yet that of Louis XVI. It was that of the increstoyables of the Directory. He had thought himself young up to that period and had followed the fashions. His coat was of light-weight cloth with voluminous revers, a long swallowtail and large steel buttons. With this he wore knee breeches and buckle shoes. He always thrust his hands into his fobs. He said authoritatively, "The French Revolution is a heap of blackguards." Chapter 3. Luc Esprit. At the age of 16. One evening at the opera, he had had the honor to be stared at through opera glasses by 2 beauties at the same time, ripe and celebrated beauties then, and sung by Voltaire, the Camargo and the Saul. Caught between 2 fires, he had beaten a heroic retreat towards a little dancer, a young girl named Henry, who was 16 like himself, obscure as a cat, and with whom he was in love. He abounded in memories. He was accustomed to exclaim, "How pretty she was! That Gamardini. The last time I saw her at Longchamps, her hair curled in sustained sentiments, with her come and see of turquoises, her gown of the colour of persons newly arrived, and her little agitation muff." He had worn in his young manhood a waistcoat of Nain Lundgren, which he was fond of talking about effusively. "I was dressed like a Turk of the Levant Levantin," said he. Madame de Beaufillers, having seen him by chance when he was 20, had described him as a charming fool. He was horrified by all the names which he saw in politics and in power, regarding them as vulgar and bourgeois. He read the journals, the newspapers, the gazettes as he said, stifling outbursts of laughter the while. "Oh!" he said, "what people these are! Corbière, Human, Casimir Perrier. There's a minister for you! I can imagine this in a journal. M. Gillenormand, minister. That would be a farce. Well, they are so stupid that it would pass." He merrily called everything by its name, whether decent or indecent, and did not restrain himself in the least before ladies. He uttered coarse speeches, obscenities, and filth with a certain tranquillity and lack of astonishment which was elegant. It was in keeping with the unceremoniousness of his century. It is to be noted that the age of periphrase in verse was the age of crudities in prose. His godfather had predicted that he would turn out a man of genius, and had bestowed on him these 2 significant names. Luc Esprit. Chapter 4. A centenarian aspirant. He had taken prizes in his boyhood at the College of Moulins, where he was born, and he had been crowned by the hand of the Duc de Nivernais, whom he called the Duc de Nevers. Neither the Convention, nor the death of Louis XVI, nor the Napoleon, nor the return of the Bourbons, nor anything else had been able to efface the memory of this crowning. The Duc de Nevers was, in his eyes, the great figure of the century. "What a charming grand seigneur," he said, "and what a fine air he had with his blue ribbon." In the eyes of M. Guillenard, Catherine II had made reparation for the crime of the partition of Poland by purchasing, for 3,000 rubles, the secret of the elixir of gold, from Best Dutch F. He grew animated on this subject. "The elixir of gold!" he exclaimed. "The yellow dye of Best Dutch F. General Lamotte's drops. In the 18th century, this was the great remedy for the catastrophes of love, the panacea against Venus, at 1 Louis the half-ounce phial. Louis XV sent 200 phials of it to the Pope. He would have been greatly irritated and thrown off his balance, had anyone told him that the elixir of gold is nothing but the perchloride of iron." M. Guillenard adored the Bourbons, and had a horror of 1789. He was forever narrating in what manner he had saved himself during the Terror, and how he had been obliged to display a vast deal of gaiety and cleverness in order to escape having his head cut off. If any young man ventured to pronounce an eulogium on the Republic in his presence, he turned purple and grew so angry that he was on the point of swooning. He sometimes alluded to his 90 years, and said, "I hope that I shall not see 93 twice." On these occasions, he hinted to people that he meant to live to be 100. Chapter 5. Basque and Nicolette. He had theories. Here is one of them. When a man is passionately fond of women, and when he has himself a wife for whom he cares but little, who is homely, cross, legitimate, with plenty of rights, perched on the code, and jealous at need, there is but one way of extricating himself from the quandary and of procuring peace, and that is to let his wife control the purse strings. This abdication sets him free. Then his wife busies herself, grows passionately fond of handling coin, gets her fingers covered with verdigris in the process, undertakes the education of half-share tenants and the training of farmers, convokes lawyers, presides over notaries, harangues scriveners, visits limbs of the law, follows lawsuits, draws up leases, dictates contracts, feels herself the sovereign, sells, buys, regulates, promises and compromises, binds fast and annuls, yields, concedes and retrocedes, arranges, disarranges, hoards, lavishes. She commits follies, a supreme and personal delight, and that consoles her. While her husband disdains her, she has the satisfaction of ruining her husband. This theory M. Guillenard had himself applied, and it had become his history. His wife, the second one, had administered his fortune in such a manner that, one fine day, when M. Guillenard found himself a widower, there remained to him just sufficient to live on, by sinking nearly the whole of it in an annuity of 15,000 francs, 3/4 of which would expire with him. He had not hesitated on this point, not being anxious to leave a property behind him. Besides, he had noticed that patrimonies are subject to adventures, and, for instance, become national property. He had been present at the avatars of consolidated 3%, and he had no great faith in the great book of the public debt. "All that's the Rue Quincampoix," he said. His house in the Rue de Fils du Calvaire belonged to him, as we have already stated. He had 2 servants, a male and a female. When a servant entered his establishment, M. Guillenard rebaptized him. He bestowed on the men the name of their province: Nîmois, Comtois, Poitevin, Picard. His last valet was a big, foundered, short-winded fellow of 55, who was incapable of running 20 paces. But, as he had been born at Bayonne, M. Guillenard called him Basque. All the female servants in his house were called Nicolette. Even the Magnon, of whom we shall hear more farther on. One day, a haughty cook, a cordon bleu, of the lofty race of porters, presented herself. "How much wages do you want a month?" asked M. Gilliner Mand. 30 francs. "What is your name?" "Olympie." "You shall have 50 francs, and you shall be called Nicolette."